Civilization in Egypt. The Egyptian civilization of about 5,000 years ago began in the Nile River Valley of northeastern Africa. This ancient civilization is one of the world's oldest and first civilization on Earth. It is also one of the most famous among civilizations that occur in different parts of the world. The ancient Egyptians built huge pyramids, temples, palaces and tombs as part of their culture. Their paintings and carvings were almost the most splendid ever created. They also produced art with simple scenes of everyday life, work and play that shows many details about their ways of life. Egypt's dry climate has helped to preserve many of the things that the Egyptians made. Archaeologists first started to uncover the remains of ancient Egypt in the late 1700s. Through those, we historians have been able to learn how great deal the world of the Egyptians was. Life on the street of the ancient Egyptians was so beautiful. Material culture, such as cloth, leather, wool, and food, provide an excellent idea of how the Egyptians lived. Information were also gotten from their tombs, including the paintings of scenes of everyday life of the people on the walls of the tombs. This was because the Egyptians thought life continued after death, believing in hereafter. Therefore, everything the deceased might need in their next life was placed in their tombs. Things found in a nobleman's tomb of an Egyptian were such as a whole meal, consisting of barley, porridge, quail, kidneys, pigeon, stewfish, bread, and small circular cakes. In the early tombs there were models of anything the dead might require, such as house, cattle, boats, and servant making bread and beer. The tombs of their prominent people contained jewelry and other precious objects. They preserved the dead as mummies by removing the internal organs and preserving the body with salt and other chemicals. Mummies of important Egyptians were placed in elaborate coffins, serving as a portrait of the deceased, like the coffin of Tutankhamun was made of solid gold. The Egyptians' skill in medicine was astonishing. They studied a great deal about the human body. Some of the earliest medical and surgical records have been found in Egypt, in which one of the earliest is the Eborus Papyrus, written about 1550 BCE, which lists 700 cures for common sickness and problems. Their writing language was also one of Egyptians' finest achievements. The Egyptian first writing language was in form of a pictorial writing called hieroglyphics. It was believed to have been the oldest of all written language, which remained in use even after a form of a cursive writing developed in the 2900 BC. The pictorial writing was painted on the walls of tombs and temples, used in 3100 BC. The latter, which was in form of a cursive writing, was written in ink with a pen made of reeds. This script was mainly written on papyrus, a form of paper made from papyrus plant. Villages and towns were situated near the Nile River, as it was the holy source of water they had access to. Their houses were made of mud brick. Walls were decorated with bright frescoes, straw matting and rugs covered the floors. The painting of walls were information about how the common people lived with their children, farmed and hunted, raised animals, and performed their daily tasks. Egyptians were fond of perfumes and cosmetics, to the extent that a vessel to hold cosmetics and tools needed to grind them were included in their tombs for use in afterlife. Their clothing was simple because of the hot climate of Egypt. White linen was most commonly used fabric, with wool for cloaks when warmth was needed. In early garments, the cloth was simply draped and tied around the body, or held in place with pins and belts. Clothing became more elaborate over time. Men often wore beards, and a false beard, made of metal, was worn by the rulers, even a female ruler. The ancient Egyptians worshipped many gods. The main god of the sun was Re. Each city has its own special gods. Because the ancient Egyptians believed in life after death, Osiris, one of the gods of the dead, was also important. The ancient Egyptians were a very practical people. They learned the principles of engineering and were able to build vast structures such as pyramids, Egyptians built the three Great Pyramids of Giza in 2550 BC during the 4th dynasty. It is still not completely understood how the Egyptians were able to build such a huge stone structure. Near the second pyramid, partly cut of a rock and partly built, a Mansuri. The Great Sphinx, with the facial features of a man, but the body of a lion. The Egyptians observed the stars and worked out calendars based on the phases of the moon and solar year. They also developed a complicated system of irrigation, which was based on the flooding times of the Nile, which benefits them a lot. The Egyptians have lived along the banks of the Nile River for at least 10,000 years. The narrow valley of the Nile was once swampy and overgrown with trees, rushes, and papyrus. Over the centuries, the landscape changed as the river brought down fertile slit to form broad delta at the river's mouth, in which people cleared the swamps and built villages. They learned to plant and grow crops. Eventually, they organized the two kingdoms, the Upper Egypt, which was in the narrow river valley in the south, and the Lower Egypt in the north, in the broad delta where the river flows into the sea. In the 2900 BC, king named Menes united the two parts of Egypt. Menes built the capital city of Memphis. After Menes, many kings called pharaohs ruled ancient Egypt. During the long history, there were more than 30 centuries of ruling families of pharaohs, in which the historians groups into three important periods: the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom lasted from 2670 to 2150 BC. It was during this period Egyptians built their Great Pyramids. After 2130 BCE, Egypt suffered civil wars, which split up the country until about 1938 BCE. The then rulers of Thebes defeated their enemies and reunited Egypt. This began the Middle Kingdom, which lasted until 1630 BCE. In this period, Egyptians' rule was extended into the neighboring country of Nubia and into Syria and Palestine. The capital was moved south to Thebes, far up the Nile in Upper Egypt. The Asian people known as Hyksos that came invaded Egypt and weakened the Middle Kingdom. The Egyptians finally forced out the Hyksos in 1539 BC. This began the New Kingdom that lasted until 1075 BCE. A mighty pharaoh of the New Kingdom was Thutmose III, who ruled from 1479 to 1426 BC. Thutmose's reign was the time of ancient Egypt, greatest power and wealth. Thutmose conquered Syria and also ordered the building of many tombs and temples. These include the great tombs hollowed out in the rock of the Valley of the Kings. During the 19th dynasty, strong kings protected Egypt. Ramses I, who ruled from 1279 to 1213 BC, carried out a vast building program. The kingdom fell apart because the kings who followed Ramses has torced the army to defend Egypt against invaders, in which the ancient power split in two parts. Riots and strife were common, and disorder spread throughout the land. External invaders later took over the land, in which it later lasted in the hands of the Arabs in the 600 CE, making Egypt still a Muslim country till this present period.